Hi, my name is Rob, and I am looking at the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development Report 2 Critical Habitat for Species at Risk. There's some news about endangered species. There's some news in the report that critical habitat for species was only identified in 32% of species recovery plan, and the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development is a federal office under the Auditor General of Canada that reports on environmental issues that fall under the federal jurisdiction. There's 4 reports this year that have been released in this month. So I am going to go to switch. So this is the report that I'm going to read and talk about. Let's see. Oh, wait, did I messed up. Okay. Okay, so this is the report. Critical habitat for species at risk. So those did it. Okay, so switch back. Those at a glance. Oh, and please feel free to comment as well. The description, I'm trying to figure out the streaming software, but here's at a glance. The loss and degradation of habitat is the primary threat for most species at risk. I would agree with that. There's a lot of habitat loss from urban development, and if you don't have habitat, there's a lot of issues around mortality. There's fragmentation, and then it says it's important to identify the location of the critical habitat that species use, and most cases additional information is needed to further identify the critical habitat through a schedule of studies. However, most studies necessary for the full identification of critical habitat were not completed on time, which could jeopardize the recovery of species at risk. There's a lot of talking about that in this report. I'm just going to go. See if anyone's making comments on Twitch. The environment and climate change, fisheries, and oceans did limited monitoring of the implementation of planned actions from action plans to conserve critical habitat on federal lands. And only 57% of planned actions were linked to documentation on activities undertaken. And then there was a lack of focused effort to get conservation actions completed to conserve and restore critical habitat, which is important to the recovery of most species at risk. So this is saying that the government isn't doing a good job protecting species. And it could affect the government's abilities to meet commitments to take urgent action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. And then there was an offset plan. I don't support offsets. When there was a finalized offset plan in place prior to granting an authorization, the department did not have an assessment for how the offsetting plans performed overall. And offset plans are supposed to used as a last result. These are scary statistics. Only 32% of species at risk had the critical habitat fully identified in the recovery strategy or action plans. And then of 120 studies necessary to fully identify critical habitat, over half were either completed late or overdue, and most were overdue by 3 years or more. So that's a failing grade. 32%, not good. And being overdue by 3 years or more is also not good. And then there's background. There's what does my I'm just checking the stream. I have to figure out how to change the name of the stream. I'm going to call it a look at endangered species law. Okay, so I updated the title, not the description though. Well, maybe I can update the description. Oh, there's no description on Twitch. Okay. I'm on both YouTube and Twitch. So, okay, back to where I was. So there's more species with global extinction now than at any time in human history. Habitat loss is the most serious threat to species in Canada and globally. And especially now with the U.S. Weakening environmental legislation, as well as Oh, I'm just going to go. I forgot something, so. Yeah, so with the US and Ontario weakening environmental legislation, as well as British Columbia weakening environmental legislation, it's going to be even more critical that the federal government take action to protect endangered species. And then those definitions in the Species at Risk Act, they define critical habitat as the habitat that is necessary for the survival or recovery of a listed wildlife species, and that is identified as species critical habitat in recovery strategy or in an action plan for the species. And then under the Species at Risk Act, once a wildlife species is listed as threatened, endangered, or expired, the responsible federal organization must prepare a recovery strategy regardless of whether the species is found on federal, provincial, or territorial lands. And then if the federal organization determines that the recovery... Oh, and the provincial government got rid of recovery strategies in new legislation. So that's problematic. So the federal organization determines the recovery of a species is feasible. The strategy must identify the species' critical habitat, which this report says has not been done. And then there's a requirement to have reports on progress and implementation of recovery strategy every 5 years until its objectives have been achieved or the species recovery is no longer feasible. The Species at Risk Act allows the responsible minister to enter into agreement with or issue a permit to a person to carry out activities that can negatively affect critical habitat. And then there's the Fisheries Act. Applicants propose offset measures to support their permit applications. The Species at Risk Act allows the responsible minister to enter an agreement with or issue a permit to a person to carry out activities that can negatively affect critical habitat. And then the Fisheries Act has similar legislation. And then applicants can propose offset measures to support their permit applications where residual homes to support species at risk cannot be... homes to species at risk cannot be avoided or minimized. Offset measures are, for example, the creation of a new suitable habitat or rehabilitation of degraded critical habitat. And the policy is offset measures are to be used as a last resort when avoiding and minimizing harm to the critical habitat is not possible. But the question then becomes, if if the government doesn't know about what the offset measures, the critical habitat is, how are they going to measure if offsets are last resort? So there's that to consider. And then the federal land is defined as lands belonging to Her Majesty in the right of Canada, or that Her Majesty in the right of Canada has power to dispose of, and all waters on an airspace above that land, the internal waters of Canada and the territorial sea of Canada, reserves, and any other lands that are set apart for use and benefit of a band under the Indian Act, and all waters on an airspace above those reserve lands. Oh, I'm being called, so I'll have to go on break. Well, I've been called upstairs, so I'll have to end it for now. End my stream for now. I hope that you have a good day. The key takeaways so far is that the government is not looking at critical habitat in a timely manner. Only a few pieces of critical habitat are looked at. I hope that I can pick up again, but I might have to just redo the stream. I don't know.